History interview is Paul R. Hempfling of Houston, Texas, member of the division trains of the 12th Armored Division. He's being interviewed today by Dr. Vernon L. Williams of the Department of History, Abilene Christian University. Today's date is January the 11th, 1996. This interview is being conducted at the home of Marion and Dale Miller in Houston, Texas. Paul, if you would, let's begin. Tell us a little bit about when you were born and the family that you lived in and your activities that would lead us up to Pearl Harbor, that 20-year period that you were growing up and going to school and so on.
Well, I was born in South Bend, Indiana in 1920. My father was transferred to Indianapolis in 1924. So we lived in a house in Indianapolis. I had an older brother living. The two of us are of seven. The five of them is dead. And my mother and father raised us there, went through grade school there, went through high school there, went on to Indiana University, and was married in Indianapolis in 1939, and I had a son when I went in service.
Give us some names. For example, let's have your parents' names and your brothers and sisters and your wife's name, okay, just for the record.
My father was Fred Hempfling, and my mother was Olive Hempfling, and I had one brother living, was John Hempfling at that time. And then we were married in 1939. My wife was, her original name was Ward, Myrtle Ward. And we were married in 39, and then I went into service in 43. So we were married a while when I went into service. Like I said, I was classified 4F twice because of weight, and then they finally took me. So.
What about education? Give us a little account of that.
Well, I went through high school and then went to Indiana University, and I started into pre-law, and I changed that because of the rigmarole going through law, and I ended up in the Department of Education. And I did not finish on the campus. I have like one semester, 17 hours, for the degree. And the reason for that is that I got that after I come home. And you had to have, in order to get the degree, I had to go back on the campus. And I couldn't do that. I had two children then and was working full time. So I lacked one semester of having my degree and teacher's license.
Tell me a little bit about the procedures of notification in those earlier attempts to draft you. How were you contacted, and what procedure did you go through?
The draft board in those days called you down. They sent you a letter, and you had to report down. I went through twice to physicals. And, of course, there was big groups going through. And each time, because I weighed 250 pounds, I did that from the time I was 17 years old. I weighed around 250 pounds. And each time I was turned down or put in 4F because of my weight. And then I kidded about it. But finally they drafted me, and I said they were scraping the bottom of the barrel, now they're taking the barrel. But like I say, I went into Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri as a combat engineer. I entered, by the way, at Fort Benjamin Harrison's, where we were reported. And then they shipped us to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and combat engineers. The whole platoon that I was in was all limited service men.
Did they ever say anything to you during that last physical, why you were being accepted?
No, I got a letter I was being drafted. But they never did tell me why. Of course, my medical records still carried the fact that obesity, or whatever it is they called it, because of overweight. And that's the reason I was in limited service when I went down there.
What about training? What happened when you arrived at Fort Leonard Wood?
We were one platoon. The whole platoon was limited service. The other three platoons were general service. We did the same things that they did. We were only there a week. We did a 30-mile march, which we were dragging our rear end to get through. But we had a buck sergeant from World War I, was our training sergeant, and he used to follow the group on a march with a bayonet fixed, and he'd grab you, keep you going. And very few fell out. We didn't get back in time, like the rest of them, but we made it, got through.
You remember his name?
No, I don't, tell you the truth. That's been quite a few years ago.
Do you remember any of the other men that in that limited service platoon?
No, I don't. In fact, as I was looking the other day, because at one time I had a list of them, of our platoon, and I can't find it anymore. They were from all over the country, by the way. I went in Indianapolis. There was some from Ohio. There was some from Michigan. They were different states involved. Wisconsin, different ones.
You said that that particular platoon was limited service. Were they all different reasons for
Yes,
that?
everybody had different reasons. That's right.
Do you remember any of the others?
No, I do not, because we used to kid about it and say, "Why are you limited service?" Because there was some of them that seemed to be physically perfectly good, but they were in limited service for some reason. Now, what it was, I don't know. But anyway, we got to, during basic training, we were there almost 3 months, and we got to know some of them. Like I say, I knew a couple of fellows in Illinois, and one or two in Wisconsin, and one or two in Minnesota. But once we left there, we were done. We didn't know each other anymore.
Now, what was the activity where you were just there a week versus the 3 months?
Well, we were in basic training for 3 months, and that included you started out with your infiltration courses. You had rifle courses. We had to qualify with an M1 rifle. We had to qualify with a Browning automatic. We had to qualify with a M1 carbine. And we also fired bazookas there. And we would spend, for instance, in the 3 month period, we spent a certain amount of time in what they called minefields. We laid a minefield, passed the map to the platoon next to us. They would map their minefield, and we'd go in and pick up the mines that they laid. They would pick ours up. And it was a rough basic training, because we lost 22 men in the basic training.
Death?
Death and injuries. One group lost their hands picking up a minefield that had been booby-trapped, and they didn't read the map right, things like that. Also, it was a course that they ran where you dug foxholes. You got down in the foxhole, and the tank would run over the top of you. Well, our platoon, we had a real good lieutenant. His name was Barkley, and I don't know that much about him except he was from Texas. He's a good second lieutenant, and he followed the tank. And when we got back to lunch, they turned in the shovels. They was missing 3 shovels, and they come to find out this one of these platoons didn't do that, and there was men killed been covered over with a tank run over them. So we had, like I say, we had a good lieutenant. He stayed with us. Every time we went on a hike, he made us put our feet up on the foot lockers and checked us for blisters and stuff like that. Most of the officers were not that good, but it was a good outfit. But we spent a week in munitions, laying minefields. We spent time in a pontoon school, they called it. We built pontoon bridges. We worked on Bailey bridges. We had to learn to use a dozer. We had to learn to use in those days, a two-man chainsaw for cutting logs and stuff like that. But that's the kind of training we got. It was ready for overseas to build bridges and roads and stuff like that. In fact, as we built quite a few miles of road in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri while we were there.
Would you describe or explain what a pontoon bridge is versus a Bailey bridge?
Okay. By the way, if you've seen these films recently about the pontoon bridge they're putting over there in Bosnia, our pontoon bridge we took rowboats like, and we laid cross pieces to them for tracks, and we would fasten them together, and then we'd push them out 2 or 3 feet or 4 feet and attach another one to that. And we kept building those and shoving them across the river, and that's the way we built the bridges. And when we got done, we had to be able to run a tank over them, and they were pretty heavy bridges, or heavy boats, ships. They were boats, really, and we had to run a tank over them. Now, the Bailey Bridge, which was, I understand, was a British invention. I don't know that, except I've heard that. It was made in sections of steel, and it took 6 men to lift a section in place. And what you did, you started out on one shore of the river, you carried the piece up to this section, and you had pins which were about 3 inches in diameter that you drove in with a mallet. And that hooked the sections together, and every time you built another section on it, you kept shoving it out. But you kept enough on land so that the front end of that bridge stayed up out of the water until you were ready for it to drop down on the other side. And again, you put runways or decking on there so that the tank could go over. So we had 1 week of Bailey Bridge building. We spent down on the river, on the Big Piney River in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and that's where we built our bridges and stuff.
Did you find that the bridges that you constructed in Europe where that experience was similar to your training experience?
Yes, from what I understood. Now, of course, I wasn't any engineers over there, but I knew some engineers, and they was doing the same thing. They built more pontoons than they did Baileys. The Baileys were so heavy to carry. I mean, the sections. It took trucks and trucks to carry them because the sections, like I said, it took 6 men, 3 on each side, to lift a Bailey bridge section in place and drive the pins in so it locked. So as far as I know, the people I talked to in our engineering battalions, Bailey bridges were not used as much as they were pontoon bridges and things.
Before we leave basic training, you didn't mention hand grenade range or chemical warfare. Do you have any
We did all of that. Yeah, we spent 2 days on the grenade range, and then we did have to go through chemical warfare. One of those deals where you went in without a gas mask on, and I'm sure they was using tear gas or whatever it was at the time, and then you had so many seconds to get your gas mask on and get out. And we went through all that, and there was a fellow here in town, by the way, who was a colonel, just died here about a year ago. He was the chemical warfare officer for our division, and he got pretty active here because after he got overseas, he got into the liberation of the camps over there. He was Jewish, and they used him for that.
And his name was?
Boy, I'd have to look it up.
Okay. Tell us what happened as the training's coming to an end, and what happens next.
Okay, when we got through with our basic training, like I said, when we finished the training, we went in for a physical. And we went through a physical examination, and that's when we were all reclassified general service. And then we were given a 7-day delay en route to go overseas. And I was lucky. I got into a camp at Shenango, they called it, was near Greenville, Pennsylvania, and because of my spec was originally office, I'd worked in offices before that, they were going to keep us there. There was 7 of us working on payrolls for POWs. And they asked us if we wanted to stay there, and we all said yes. But the WACs come in the next day and took over, and so we shipped right straight over overseas. So I was overseas 14 days after D-Day. Went to Kilmer from there, and then got on a boat and went straight on over.
What was your experience on the ship? Were there other troops?
No, they were all replacements. There was over 5,000 on the ship, they told us. And I got on, when we left the port of New York, I got in the bunk. I didn't get out of the bunk till we hit Liverpool. I was seasick the whole time I was over there. And I had friends that would go to the PX and buy me a box of Clark bars or something like that, and I laid in the bunk and eat Clark bars or candy bars till we got over there. So I was seasick all the way over.
Not a voyage of memory, good memory.
Yeah. Yeah.
What happened once you arrived in Liverpool, was it?
Okay, yeah, there was a camp outside of Liverpool. I can't tell you the name of it now, but there was, they said 110,000 combat engineers there. And what they were doing, they were picking them up as replacements for D-Day losses, because we were there right after D-Day. And they were still picking up minefields and things like that on the D-Day coast. And these planes would come in, large planes, bringing bodies or stretcher cases, most of them, and brought them to the hospital. And every time they would unload, and they would get the plane ready, and they'd call a roster out of the replacement depot to replace these men, and took them back over there. I just lucked out. I stayed in this camp up here until they said they had enough combat engineers for replacement of D-Day losses. And then they put us in what they said was going to be infantry training, start us all over, and that's when we got shipped to Tidworth Barracks.
Describe Tidworth Barracks. What did you see when you got there?
Well, Tidworth Barracks, I was lucky in that the replacements that went in there, by the way, this was a British camp, and the actual British buildings were those, blocks of, they weren't cement blocks, but they were British blocks, and they were cement-type buildings. And the trouble was, you'd have, if I remember right, there was 40 bunks on each side of the aisle, but the only heat you had was a fireplace down at one end, and if you were at the other end, you bundled up with plenty of blankets, or you was cold. But I was there, I guess, about 3 weeks when the 12th come into the States, or come in from the States. And then they took me out of there and put me in the 12th at that time.
Well, what's your first memory of your time with the 12th Armored Division? Sort of talk us through the day you arrived.
We were there, it was all day long. We'd been out hiking that day and went back that night to our barracks and went through the mess hall. And that night we were sitting there playing cards. And a sergeant from the training battalion come in and called 3 names off, and I was one of them. And says, report to the orderly room. When we got over there, then we had this captain from Division Trains was there picking up his replacements, and I was one of the 3. And as soon as he got the 3 men over there, he says, go get your duffel bags or whatever you got and come back here and we'll take you to the unit. And they took us, in our case, went to Division Trains. And it was real nice in the beginning because the company clerk was a young fellow, and he got us a place to sleep and did all this. We were welcomed into the outfit pretty well. It was a nice outfit to be with, yeah.
Do you remember the captain's name?
Captain William A. McCarthy. Fact is, he just died about a year and a half ago. He was at all our reunions up until about a year and a half ago.
What was your routine while you were in England before you shipped over?
Well, truthfully, the main thing we did was getting ready to go. We was assigned new rifles, of course, and all that stuff, and they got us ready to get across the channel, and I was assigned to help in the orderly room at the time because, like I said, my spec called for office work, and we were getting records and everything ready to go overseas, so I helped out there. But it was only, I don't remember the exact time that we were there. After I joined the 12th, it wasn't too long. We went on overseas, went on over across the channel, and landed at Le Havre. Le Havre was all burned out. We had to go over the rope siding on the ship with a duffel bag on one shoulder and a rifle on the other, and everything. It was a mess. Go down into an LCI and then went into the Le Havre. And we got loaded in trucks, and our point where we got set up was at a town called Auffay, A-U-F-A-Y, France. And we pulled in there. It was pouring down rain at night. And the lieutenant come back and says, everybody pile out and cross this ditch here to your left and put your pup tents up. And we went over there and crawling through water and rain and everything else. Set our pup tents up. Got shelter halves together, and the next morning we found out we were in an apple orchard, and we were sleeping on what we thought was rocks. They were apples. But it was a miserable night that night. Then the next day we had to get out. All of our bedrolls and everything had to be dried out and everything else.
Before we go on with the narrative of the battle and the combat period, could you tell us a little bit about just what Division Trains was and the duties that encompassed the unit throughout the rest of the war?
Well, basically Trains was just like the name. They were a supply. They were not used as heavily in that sense as much as they should have been, but Trains had attached to them all the chaplains. So we had to furnish drivers, and that's where this Father Donovan that you're going to talk to, he was one of the chaplain's assistants. We had grave registration attached to us for picking up bodies. We had the Red Cross. There was 3 or 5 girls and 3 men that was attached to us for rations and transportation. We furnished a truck, for instance, after we got settled in France, to these girls, Red Cross girls, and put one of these big deep fry things in the back of the truck, and they made donuts and passed it out to different units, but we had to drive into the units. Basically, my CO, by the way, this Captain McCarthy, was what they called the billeting officer for our division headquarters. So when we had to move, or when they moved, we moved with them, and he had to get all the billets. And he would go in and empty houses out or where we had to so that they could put a division headquarters people in there as well as us.
Were you ever a part of that process?
No, I was not. One of these guys that was taken in with me, I told you, he spoke pretty good French. And in France, he worked with the company commander. And then when this other fellow took over when we hit in Germany, he took over and did the interpreting for them. And we'd pick out, the division headquarters would tell Captain McCarthy, we want to be in a certain area or a certain place. And of course, that's when he arranged building in that area. You know.
What about the days that followed after that first night? Let's say leading up to Herlesheim.
Okay.
What were you doing?
We first of all, after that first night, our CO come to us and says, if you can get into a barn to sleep in, rather than sleep in this apple orchard, well, you can. So we were lucky enough. The family wouldn't put us in the barn. They put us in their. They had a parlor, they called it. We moved the furniture out, and there was about 15 of us. Put our bedrolls along a wall and slept there. But basically, once we got settled there, we were getting everything ready then for combat. We had to get our material ready, our instruments, our rifles, all the stuff that we needed. And the truck drivers then were assigned to, we had a transportation section, we had a recon section, we had the different units that made up the work that the 12th, or the trains would do. And we were assigned to those units. And like I said, I was the backup on the artillery room, really. But there was 3 of us that would fill in on that job. And we also, one of the jobs that I got after we got into France, we would go to Special Services, and where we were able to, we would draw a movie in a projector and show a movie for our outfit. And I had to haul it back and forth to all the equipment. We had a gasoline generator and a movie projector and everything, and I would take it back to Special Services and turn it all back in, rewind it and everything. And then the next 2 or 3 days later, we'd get another movie like that, and I had to rent them. Sometimes we'd run them for 2 or 3 times in an evenings in order for the whole outfit to get to see them. Because we were pulling guard duties and things like that as long as we went around.
When you say you're for the whole outfit, are you talking about just division trains?
Just division trains.
Not the division?
No. Division trains only. That's all. I did all that for them. And truthfully, we did pretty well. Clear up till almost the end of the war, we was able to draw movies ever so often and show them. And then later on, too, I tried to handle PX supplies for our outfit, which we draw from Special Services, our allotment, and we had to allot it out to different men in the outfit. And we moved along with Special Services and with the other outfits. Like I said, the grave registration was attached to us. We hauled bodies in. That was another job we had when we'd have a lax time as far as battle commitments. We'd get replacements come in to us, and the fellow that was the company clerk and I would sit down, we'd sort these files out by the units they were going to, and then we assigned a truck to go to the 17th Infantry, the 23rd, or wherever we went, and take their files and haul these men up as replacements to the new outfits. And at Herlesheim, when you're talking about Herlesheim, there was, of course, I'm sure you knew the background on that, there was quite a loss. And after Herlesheim, division headquarters put out a directive to each unit with a percentage figure to furnish to the infantry units and the tank battalions that lost these men at Herlesheim. And in our case, since it was a very small outfit, we only had to furnish 1 man who left our outfit and went to the 17th Infantry.
So they actually started scavenging support units within the division.
Oh yeah, they had to, yeah, because that was after Herlesheim. You know, they had a terrific loss there, and as a result, they pulled back in and started rehabilitating the units, and I felt sorry for some of these replacements coming over from the States. Some of them say they'd had 3 weeks basic training and they were overseas already, so you didn't have too much training.
What about medical support with the 82nd Medical Battalion? Did you all have any role to play there?
We didn't have too much. We did, at times, they'd call on us for transportation. But basically, they had their own transportation and everything, and they moved along with the different units. See, we had 1 man in our outfit from 82nd Medical, and he was supposed to be our liaison man if we needed help. But basically, each of the units had men from the 82nd. It's like the Signal Corps. Each of the units had radio men and stuff that was out of Signal Corps that traveled right with them. So we had 1 man from Signal Corps, or 2 men from Signal Corps, 1 man from 82nd. We had there was another outfit that we had a man too. They were just on temporary loan to us, in effect.
You remember any of their names?
No, the only one I remember is a fellow by the name of Wally Hartman. He was a sergeant in radio, and he's the one who kept in contact. He had a radio in his truck, and he kept in contact with headquarters and all the other units as they moved. And he was the radio man we had.
What about officers in division trains other than?
Well, we had a captain, a first lieutenant, and 2 second lieutenants. One of them, his name was Fleischman, and he died right after the war, but he made it through the war. And another, the 2 second lieutenants was Kettler and Probert, and both of those belonged to the association, and they have died within the last 5 or 6 years. They come to our reunions nearly. Captain McCarthy, he was the last one to die. The rest of them died before him.
So your unit was essentially a company level unit,
Right.
With
right.
the captain being the company commander.
We were actually Division Trains Headquarters Company. Now, Division Trains Headquarters had a colonel, Bull Evans, or I think his name was John Evans. They called him Bull Evans. He was a bird colonel, and he had a major under him, and then there was 2 staff sergeants or first sergeants under them. But they mainly handled the paperwork for division trains, and of course we were the company that everything passed down to.
You executed all the work.
Yeah. Bull Evans, by the way, was a instructor at West Point in mathematics. And I don't want to tell tales out of school, but I understand he was a full bird colonel. And when he went overseas, he'd never been in combat before, never been in any of those units, line units. I understand he screwed up, was in CCR, reserve thing, and he screwed up in the beginning, and he was pulled out of there, and another colonel was put in his place, and he come back to trains in. Now, that is all secondhand to me. I just knew he did. When I went overseas, he was not our colonel, but he was colonel about 2 weeks after we landed in France, where he was our colonel.
Let's talk a little bit more about Hildesheim, since that was such a significant action for the division. A lot of loss in terms of KIAs, but also a lot of loss to POW.
POWs, wounded. There was an awful lot of, I don't know the exact figure, but it was pretty high.
In addition to being tapped for replacements, what impact did that battle seem to have on your day-to-day operations?
Well, it had a lot to do with us we had to pull back into what they call rest areas, which was not much of a rest area. It was, you were redoing all your units and getting them up to shape. And our biggest part, like I said, we had to furnish only one man out of our company, but then we had to go pick replacements up. As the replacements come in, and they would come to us, and then we would reassign them to different units, or they were assigned to units, and we hauled them into the units. But that was about 3 weeks that it took us to begin to get back to strength after that.
What kind of equipment did you use? In other words, what size trucks, Jeeps, and so on?
We had, I was trying to think when I talked to Marion about this the other day, but it seemed to me we had 20 or 25 Jeeps. And we had about 50 GMC 6x6s. And that, all of our, well, we did have one weapons carrier and one half-track. But basically our thing was all the 6x6 GMCs. And we hauled supplies, men, everything in those. And the Jeeps mostly were assigned, like the company commander had a Jeep, each of the officers had a Jeep. Each unit had their own Jeep. Like the chaplains, we had 5 chaplains that we furnished Jeeps to, like that. So the Jeeps were on call. They weren't all assigned immediately, but I mean, if somebody come into our outfit and needed a Jeep for something, well, we had an assignment from them.
You had a pretty large vehicle inventory. What was the relationship between your company and, let's say, the 134th Maintenance Battalion? Did they dole out some people that remained with you? Or how did that work?
No, the Maintenance Battalion, 134th, basically, they operated on tank retrieval and things like that. And they did do some trucks, but we had our own maintenance outfit within the division, or within the company, that when we had a truck loss or something like that, we had mechanics who could do that repair on them. And we also went back, and I don't know this for a fact, but I talked to one of our staff sergeants who was in transportation with our outfit, and he helped retrieve some tanks even, that they went out with like a tank retriever and brought them back to the 134th to repair. We didn't do any, they didn't interfere with our outfit, in other words. We had our own maintenance men.
Were you aware of the background of any of those maintenance men?
Not really.
Division trained?
No. See, by going in, I didn't go through basic with them, so I had to learn all this as we went along. So I didn't know them that well. We had of course, there was a recon section in our outfit. There was a maintenance outfit, and we had these different groups, recons and all that. And each one of them had a staff sergeant in charge, and they had assignments for each of them.
What about German prisoner of war? You run into any?
Twice we got involved, but as soon as we got POWs, we marched them back to the MP battalions and let them take them over, because we didn't fool with them. We had, excuse me, we had 6 Russian young fellows who had escaped from from German camps, and they wanted to stay with us, which we let them work as KPs and fed them, and they stayed with us. But other than that, no, the POWs that we got, as soon as we'd get a hold of them, and we did get some groups which we took over, but then we would march them back or get them back to the MP so that they could take them on back to camps.
Do you have any specific memories of those particular activities?
No, the only thing I remember, and it was when we caught POWs, they had a lot of lice and things of that type, and we made them strip, and we used to remember DDT, they used to spray their bodies with that DDT, and then we'd burn their uniforms and give them some clothes to get back to the POW camp. That's it. But we didn't fool with them very long. I know the one reason I remember this particularly is that we had about 6 or 8 prisoners. I don't remember how many. And we were to spray them with DDT and burn their clothes. And I took one of the uniforms and cut all the buttons off and all the stuff that was insignia and everything like that. And I still got that. But that was the only one. The rest of them I burned the uniforms anyway and didn't fool with any of them.
Anybody else that strikes your memory within the division, officers, men, that you have recollections during combat?
No, not really, because, see, we were in and out. Now, as part of our combat experience, we would load 6x6s up with 5-gallon jerry cans, gasoline, and we'd drive into the line. Now, this was particularly true when we were working with Patton's Third Army. We'd drive up alongside the tank and hand up jerry cans to them, and it'd take about 8 cans, 5-gallon each, for each tank. And then as soon as you emptied this, or gassed this tank up, we'd move on to another tank and do the same thing. Every other load or so would be ammunition for the 90mm guns instead of the gasoline. And when we were with Patton, and you'll find this out anytime you talk to anybody that remembers the time with Patton, we would get in 2 hours of sleep a night because we were on the move entirely. You know, Patton, he pushed, and we would fill gasoline cans on the truck and maybe drive 20 miles to get to the line. Time we emptied the gasoline cans, we'd start back. The dump would move back up. We were only a mile or 2 from the dump. And we'd refill again and start out. When we were with Patton, it was pretty rough.
No time to sleep between hauls?
No. The only time we could sleep was when somebody was loading the truck for you. Something like that.
What about General Allen and some of the people in the division headquarters?
Well, I met, I didn't meet him. I was in an area with him one time, and that's all I knew of him. Most of the officers in division headquarters we didn't see very often. My CO, like I said, he was in and out of division headquarters all the time because he was their building officer. But very frankly, we didn't see too much of them. We did deal with some of the sergeants. We had one sergeant was in supply. We used to deal with him, things like that. But we really didn't fool much with the officers. The officers was mainly concerned with the Combat Command A, B, and Reserve. Well, those were your units. And see, every combat outfit when you had CCA, Combat Command A, it would have an infantry battalion, it would have an artillery battalion, and a tank battalion, all those different outfits that made up that battalion, or made up that combat command. So we didn't have too much to do with them. We did, when we got pulled out, by the way, not too far down the road near the end of the war, we got into Colmar. And at Colmar, we were pulled out of the 7th Army and attached to the French 1st Army, which at that time they told us we were the first American division to be under command of somebody other than Americans. But we were only there probably 10 days. They cleared out the Colmar pocket, and we went back to the 7th Army then.
Do you remember any encounters at all with black troops that were attached to the 12th Armored Division?
No, I do not. There were, after Hurlesheim, there were 3 Black Company D, they called them, that was come in, and each one of them was assigned to the 3 infantry divisions. The only thing I had to do with them, or even come in contact with them, is there were times when we sent replacements in to their outfit, and that's the only time I had anything to do with them.
And these were black replacements?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Have you had any encounters with any of these men since the war?
No. Well, yes and no. and I was 12 years in our association as membership chairman. And at that time, we were using a 195-page roster, which supposedly was the book from the World War II at the end of 45, which was not too accurate, but we used that to find names. I found a black man here in Houston who had been in one of those companies. And he was in pretty bad shape physically. And I went out and talked to him, and he was having kidney dialysis 3 times a week, so he said he wasn't interested in joining the association. But he was one of those black troops in Company D. I don't know which company.
Well, after Hurlesheim, through the Colmar operation, anything you would like to add to your activities? Anything deviated? Any differences?
No, the one thing I remember particularly, but which doesn't mean nothing to the rest of the people. In 1944, December, I was called into the orderly room and told to get with a truck driver and report to Special Services. And I said, "Where are we going?" And he says, the company commander says, "Just go with the truck." So I got in the truck and went over there, and we ended up with a Lieutenant Poster, his name was in Special Services, and he come and got in the truck, and I crawled in the back end, and he brought a sergeant with him. And we got into the truck and started across northern France, and we got so far along, and the MP stopped us and says there's a big battle going on in front of us, which happened to be the Battle of Bulge. So we swung south and went down to Paris and spent 2 days in Paris before the lieutenant could get a okay for us to go on. And we turned out, at that time, we found out we were headed for Brussels. So we went over to the East Coast, headed up to Brussels, got in there the day before Christmas. Everything was closed because of the holiday. So they put us up in the hotel there, and we waited 2 days till after Christmas was over, and then they sent us to a warehouse, and we come to find out we were there to pick up the officers' liquor ration. And I didn't even know officers got a liquor ration at that time. But we took cases and cases and cases of liquor in that truck and then drove back to our outfit. At that time we were down almost to Strasbourg. And we went back with liquor ration. That was the one thing I remember particularly out of all that time. And it was so doggone cold in December, we got into our sleeping bags and laid on the back end of the truck. You know, I had this thing, the seats that folded down. We slept on those seats because it was so cold.
What about French civilians?
Well, we had some contact with them. Like I said, when we landed in Alfay, France, the CO told us if we could get a barn to sleep in, we could get out of the apple orchard. Well, we went up to this house, and this woman, her husband was a German prisoner. And so she was glad to see us. She told us to come inside and sleep in the parlor, which we did. And while we were there, by the way, they owned the apple orchard where we were, and they told us if we could get them some sugar, they'd bake us a pie, which we got them some sugar out of the mess tent. and they baked a big sheet pie for us there. And that's the closest relationship with French people that I had. I mean, you know, you went to barber shops and things like that, but as far as actually being with them, why, we didn't have too much contact with them.
Did you not stay in any other
Yeah,
housing?
we got into some housing, but most of the cases, the people who gave us housing would move out, and we took over the house. We were only there temporarily, you know, overnight, sometimes 1-2 days at the most, then you moved on. So we didn't have too much. Now in Germany, we kicked people out. Our company commander would go up there and say, I want these 2 houses, and they had to find someplace to go, and we took over the housing. But in France, they were much easier to get along with the French.
What about souvenir hunting in Germany?
I don't know too much about that. I did send home a P-38 and a Luger, a Mauser rifle, a Italian carbine. I sent some things like that home. But actually, it was stuff that we picked up. The Mauser or the P-38 we got an officer that was a prisoner, took it away from him. Some of the people did collect a lot of stuff over there, but our CO was pretty tight about it. He wouldn't let them send stuff back to the States. We had, I shouldn't tell this, but the colonel that was from West Point, he sent more stuff home than all the rest of the outfit put together. he got a crew together and made plywood cases for a lot of that stuff and sent it home. He was a rifle gun collector, and we got into a castle. It was a German count, and he had a room full of guns. And that was, when he found out it was there, he put guards on it and shipped all those guns home.
What do you remember about Germany before the end of the war, and bring us up to the conclusion there?
Well, when the war ended itself, I was in a camp in Gingham, or a house in Gingham, which is just north of Munich. And truthfully, by the way, I have since done genealogy on my family, and they were within 30 miles of that place where my family come from. I didn't know that. But anyway, when the war ended, about 2 weeks after the war ended, my company commander, Captain McCarthy, was transferred to the 1st Armored Division as occupation. And he was transferred to trains, division trains, in 1st. So he came back and asked, he said he had 17 openings, and wanted to know if any of us, I lacked 5 points at the time going home, wanted to go back with him to 1st Armored for occupation, and we did. So I stayed with him until my points come up, and then we went to the 2nd Armored to come home. And that was, when we went to Darmstadt for this occupation duty, there was nothing in that town standing. I mean, it was really rubble. And we had to they used bulldozers to clear streets out like that. And we set up our mess tent and our mess hall in a streetcar barn there. And there was one house back in the property that was still standing, and we used that for our company headquarters and everything. And it was 3 stories high. The upper 2 stories was full of bunks for all of us, and our mess tent was our mess hall was in the old streetcar barns. Of course, there was no streetcars running because everything was bombed out.
What did you do? What were your duties there?
Well, truthfully, we were getting set up, actually getting a unit set up so that they could stay in occupation. And they were bringing people in at the same time, because as soon as we got our points, we went to 2nd Armored to come home. And what we were doing was setting up guidelines as to what they were going to do in occupation duty. And again, I was working with a company clerk at that time and the 1st Sergeant. And we were defining areas that had to be handled and stuff like that.
You encounter any German civilians, any interaction there at this point?
Well, no. When we had this streetcar barns for our mess thing, we set up a little club, and we bought beer, hogsheads of beer, and we bought champagne out of Champagne, France, and we bought cognac, and we set up this club, and we tried to break even on what it cost by selling the stuff at cost. And then we made just enough. We had a 5-piece German band who would come in and play for us 4 nights a week. And we paid them off, but our mess sergeant was spam in those days. He used to put up a sign, sandwiches tonight for all the women. And he put that sign up and make spam sandwiches. And man, you had to club them off because they were hurting for food. And those women come in there with the hundreds trying to get food. But that's after the war ended, that's as close as I come to fooling with German civilians at all.
What about children?
Children, we we all had a soft heart for them. They would stand at when you get through your mess line, you empty your mess kit out, and here they were standing with buckets and everything else wanting you to scrape whatever you had left into their thing. And all of us did, tried to help feed the kids where we could. You couldn't do it very well, but you got them something. And candy bars and stuff like that was very common. But yeah, I felt awful sorry for the kids more than I did the adults. Because the adults, most of them Nazis, whether they said they were or not. They had been in favor of it all the way back. But these kids had nothing to do with it, and they were starving to death.
What about the liberation of the death camps? Did you observe any of that?
No, I got in at one of the camps we liberated, or the division liberated. I got there 2 days after they had done it. And I did have some photographs that I took of bodies stacked and everything. And like I told you, this fellow that lived here in town became he was Jewish, and he became a Holocaust committee of some kind. And he asked us through our Hellcat News if any of us had pictures to send them to him or get them to him. And I sent mine. My wife wouldn't let me have them anyway. She put them away and wouldn't let anybody see them because they were bodies stacked up and everything. She said it wasn't worth looking at. So I sent them to him. But I took those about 2 days or 3 days after they had liberated the camp. But that's the only thing we were in back of them in Florida Mountain, back of the outfit.
Do you remember what camp? Was it Landsberg?
No. Frankly, I don't know. I'd know the name if I heard it, but no. I was trying to think. No, it wasn't Auschwitz. It was one of those like that. But no, we went in after everything was liberated, and they helped clean up, and we helped haul food into them, stuff like that. But of course, they couldn't give the prisoners very much food because it'd kill them. They hadn't had anything. So, but we hauled food in, and they helped fix up food for them.
What about negatives? Did any negatives survive the photographs that you took either there or during the war?
I frankly don't know. I really don't, because I didn't take too many pictures until the end of the war. Really, the pictures that I have, by the way, you've got copies of the 2 volumes of our history. I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the pictures that I got are in those 2 volumes, because I sent them all to Ken Bradstreet at the time. He put them in the book.
What happened once you went to the 2nd Armored Division?
Well, we went to 2nd Armored Division, and it was scheduled when we got there to be a transfer home unit. But we were there about 5 weeks, and the reason was we were sent to Camp Lucky Strike down on southern coast of France. Anyway, we got down there, and the ship dock workers in the United States was on strike. So we laid there in Camp Lucky Strike for 30 days because we couldn't get a ship out. And what they did when we moved into Camp Lucky Strike, they took all of our French francs and all of our German marks, any money we had, and was going to pay us aboard ship. So we laid there for 30 days we couldn't even go to the movies because the movies was a mark or something like that. We didn't have any money. So we played ball all the time. We did. Played basketball, football, and baseball, stuff like that all the time. For 30 days we laid there.
What was housing like?
It wasn't too bad. It was temporary barracks that they built. And it wasn't too bad, and the food was good. But we couldn't go out of the camp. We had no money to spend. We couldn't even go to the movies.
The barracks were actually wooden, not tents?
Wooden barracks. No, they were wooden barracks. We had it was kind of a nice setup. Of course, they were using that as a point to ship everybody for overseas, coming back home.
What about 12th Armored Division men? Were very many with you there?
No, not too many, because first of all, the 12th Armored Division itself stayed in Heidenheim. And I had gotten shipped, like I said, to occupation duty. And there was about 10 or 12 of us that I know of from the 12th that all went there to Camp Lucky Strike together. And I'm sure there were others, but we didn't know them offhand because we weren't connected with them. got on board ship and come back to the States, and we went into Kilmer as soon as we got here. And I was only at Kilmer one day and then shipped to Camp Atterbury, Indiana, where I was discharged.
What'd you do after the war, immediately after the war?
Well, the 2 days after I got discharged, I went back to the office where I worked before, and they said, well, we're waiting on you to come in here. And I went back to work on the following Monday after I got discharged. And I stayed with them, yeah.
And what company was this?
Texas company, Texaco. I was with them 38 years, and I've been retired now 17 years from there. Yeah, they had a job waiting on me. We were glad to get something to do right away.
Tell me a little bit about your family. What happened to you in terms of, do you have any more children?
Yeah.
Talk us through the next 10, 20 years up to retirement.
Well, when I came home, I had a son who was then 3 years old, almost 4. And my wife had stayed with her father temporarily when I went in service, but his mother, was her grandmother, had cancer, so she moved in with her grandmother to look after her. And my son and her lived there on the south side of Indianapolis, and she died in May. I was discharged in February, and she died in May. And so then we bought a home, bought our first home, and I went back to work, was working full time, and then our daughter was born 47, I guess, a couple of years later. Anyway, my son, he's 52 today, and she's 48. And he's married. I have 2 grandsons with him and a great-grandson from that side. My daughter's never married. She's a nurse. But my son, like I say, he went to work after I come home from service. I was transferred. Indianapolis was the office I was in. They transferred me to Chicago. I was up there 7 years, and then to New York for 6 years. When I went to the main office up there, I was on the accounting staff up there. And then I went to Houston. But while we were in Chicago, my son went to work for the company. And he ended up getting transferred here to Houston before I did. So he was already down here when I came.
What about veterans benefits? Did you use any of those after the war?
Yes. Like I said, I went back to school and was carrying a full load of classes at the same time I was working. But I got to the point where I couldn't go any further because I had to go back on campus to get my final degree. But yes, that's the only thing I used was the GI Bill that way. Never, and I dropped I wish I had not dropped my insurance, but I dropped my insurance too, so that I had no other benefits from that.
Track your activity with the 12th Armored Division Association. Where did you begin active? And
I got this company clerk that I talked about worked with me in the division. We used to exchange Christmas cards every year, and every year he'd say something about the association. But I was working hard full time, going to school, had kids and everything. So I told him, I said, I can't take any time for this. But I joined the association. Let's see, this is '96. I must have joined in 1980, something like that. And I started going to the events and stuff. And my wife died in '80, so I was free. My kids was up and married and everything, so I was able to take part. Well, then after, I don't know, 4 or 5 years of attending reunions, I was asked to take over the membership chairman's job. And in the meantime, I had worked very hard on our unit, getting members back. So they found out, and I got, at that time, I got a Blue Ribbon Award for the work I'd done with our own unit. And then I took over the membership chairman's job. And I enjoyed that for, must have been 10 or 12 years. And then they ran me for second vice president. And of course I moved up through the ranks as second vice president, first vice president, and then president. And I was president the year they had their reunion in Charlotte, North Carolina. Had a nice turnout, nice thing. Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to add, looking back over time, especially the World War II years, people you encountered, memories you have of men who were members of the 12th Armored Division, events that took place, training, combat, anything you'd like to add?
Truthfully, we lost track of each other. Like I said, this company clerk and I kept contact, but we lost track of everybody. And then when I started looking for members into the association, we was able to track down and find quite a few of them. We have 30 members out of that 110 is in the association now. And at one time there was only 3. So we got a bunch of them together, and they started showing up at reunions. And I've seen guys that I hadn't seen since 1945 have come to the reunions, and we've gotten acquainted again. Yeah.
This recent membership drive that Maurice Glover's been involved in, and Dale Miller
Yeah.
here in Houston, were they able to find any additional
Oh,
men
yes. They turned out a lot of people.
I mean, from your unit?
Well, yeah, there was some, but not very many. Because see, we had made at that time a pretty good job out of our own unit. But yes, they have found some, and there's still some. I'm missing out of the 110 men. I'm missing about 8 men that I have no record of what happened to them or anything. The rest of them I can account for, either in the association or dead, or we've got a bunch of them who will not belong to the association, but I know where they're at and I correspond with them. That's another thing I found out. I found some guys that had served with me, and I asked them why they don't join the association, and most of the cases they come to and say, my wife and I were married after the war. She didn't want nothing to do with the war and all that, so she won't let me join. I found that in several cases. Of course, that's what keeps our organization going, the wives. If we didn't have the support of all the wives we do, and the work that they put on, why, our organization would have fell apart a long time ago. So they're very important.
This concludes the interview.